No one deserves to be unalived in front of their apartment in cold blood. No one. Catherine Kitty Genovese had already had quite the night. She worked as a bar manager in the middle of Kew Gardens, Queens, New York. By sheer accident, she went home after such a long night and stumbled across the most misguided individual just looking for trouble. But why? How did the murder of Kitty Genovese change the way we contact emergency services today? What psychological theory did the incident spawn? Stick around to find out, because we're going to talk about it today. Really quick, please like and subscribe to this channel if you like dark, mysterious, strange topics like this, because that is my expertise. And welcome to Creepycassettiyt, your place for horror and reality and beyond. Back to the video. It was March 13th, 1964, early morning, not quite 3 a.m. Kitty Genovese had just finished working a long shift at the bar she managed, Ev's 11th hour, just off Jamaica Avenue in Queens, New York. She shooed the few stragglers out the door, locked up, gathered her purse, got in her little red car, and headed home. As she was waiting at a traffic light on Hoover Avenue, just 10 blocks from her home, a demon by the name of Winston Mosley saw her. Mosley was a predator, and he was on a mission to murder a woman. Any woman. Unfortunately, his target that night was Kitty. He followed her into the parking lot near the Kew Gardens train station, just feet from her two-story Tudor-style apartment complex and storefront where she resided. Kitty parked the car and got out. Mosley did the same. Kitty saw him. His appearance startled her. Maybe it was the crazed look in his eyes, or maybe she could tell that he was up to no good. So she ran. But Mosley caught up, quickly stabbing her in the back. Kitty screamed, "Oh my God, he stabbed me! Please help me! Please help me!" Then Mosley stabbed her again. And from the upper windows of a nearby apartment, Robert Moser, a neighbor of Genovese, called out, "Let that girl alone!" Mosley scampered off like the coward he was, but unfortunately, he wasn't done. He just needed to move his car, so he spun the block, parked on a different street, and returned to the scene to complete his attack. First, he checked the train station, thinking she had gone for help. Then he found her in the apartment complex next door. Kitty had half walked, half dragged herself to the entrance of her apartment. This was hard for a number of reasons, one being that Kitty's lung had been punctured. While she could scream, she couldn't extend the squeal for long enough before her voice would falter. And secondly, the complex entrance was at the back of the building, while the front of the building was the storefronts, a drugstore, a bookstore, a bar. She just managed to make it to her apartment's vestibule, where she collapsed in front of the steps. Any hope she had of making it, of getting medical care, were quickly dashed when Mosley found her. She screamed weakly, but enough to draw attention from her neighbors. The sound of shuffling feet and a couple of doors opening and closing could be heard, and Kitty fought for her life. She used all the power she could conjure with her barely 5-foot frame. But Mosley wanted her silence and less combative, so he stabbed her multiple times. A wound to Kitty's neck eventually silenced her, and all she could do was gurgle and moan. She faded out, and he continued the attack, this time choosing to violate her. When he removed her underclothes, he found that she was menstruating, and when he was unable to get it up, he used a knife in place of his member. This guy makes me sick. Like, how disturbed do you have to be to do that to someone? When he was done, he took Kitty's keys, wallet containing about $43 and some cosmetics. Then he fled the scene for the second time. 30 minutes, it had been 30 minutes from the time the attack began to when Mosley left the last time. A few minutes after the attack, Sophia Farrar, a good friend of Kitty, found her. She was still alive, hanging on by the thinnest of threads. Sophia held Kitty in her arms, rocking her as they waited for an ambulance. She was sobbing, trying to help her friend stay conscious. At around 4:15 a.m., the police and ambulance finally showed up. Kitty was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late. She died before she could make it there. Before we go any further into the police investigation and court case, let's get to know Kitty. Kitty was born on July 7, 1935, making her a Cancer. She was the eldest child of 5 children in a Catholic Italian family. She grew up in Park Slope area of Brooklyn, New York, a neighborhood predominantly populated by Irish and Italian families. For school, she attended the all-girl Prospect Heights High School, and she was known to be a good student, fiercely independent with a sunny disposition, the kind of person who was easy to like, a real firecracker. Kitty was either just about to graduate or had recently graduated when her mother, father, and younger siblings all moved to New Canaan, Connecticut. Ironically, the reason behind the move was that her mother had witnessed a murder. Kitty stayed behind and planned her wedding. She and a man by the name of Rocco Fazal married in 1954, but the marriage was annulled in the same year when Kitty officially came out. After the dissolution of her marriage, she moved into a small apartment in Brooklyn. For a short time, she did some clerical work to make ends meet, but she was definitely not fond of those types of jobs. So by late 1950s, she found herself bartending, which it turns out she actually enjoyed. I couldn't find the name of the first bar she was hired at, but she worked there up until 1961 when she was arrested for bookmaking, which is taking bets from bar patrons on horse races. She and her friend Dee Guarnieri were jailed for a short period of time and then fined $50 and released. Kitty was simultaneously released from her position at the bar. Not long after she picked up the job at Ev's 11th hour, working double shifts and saving her money, she was making about $750 a month, which in today's money would be about $7,705.92, which is nothing to sneeze at. Kitty was about her bag, and I feel that. She had the ambitions of opening an Italian restaurant with the money she saved. At some point, she went from bartending to managing the bar after its owner went MIA. In 1963, Kitty met Marianne Ziolanco at Swing Rendezvous, an underground sapphic nightclub in Greenwich Village. Two quickly fell in love and moved in together. There's not a lot about their relationship, mostly because the two lived as roommates to people in the outside world. You know, 1960s. They weren't all that big on people being anything but straight. The morning the murder occurred was the date of Kitty and Mary Ann's first anniversary. Instead of enjoying a decadent breakfast and spending time talking about their future, Mary Ann was brought to the police station to identify Kitty's body. After the identification, she was grilled in a 6-hour interrogation about her relationship with Kitty. Those fools really tried to pin the whole murder on Mary Ann for some dumb and more than likely phobic reason. To add insult to injury, when the police were collecting information from people who were around at the time of the murder, they were even asking neighbors unnecessarily intimate questions about their relationship. 3 days following the murder, Kitty's family came to collect her remains and they had her buried in New Canaan, where she could stay close by. The police dug around, collecting a clue here and there, but not enough information to truly crack the case. It wasn't until 6 days later that Mosley was taken into custody. He'd been caught burglarizing homes in the Ozone Park area of New York. He was using his white Chevy Corvair to pack in all his ill-gotten gains. The police noticed that his car matched the description of the vehicle seen on the night of Kitty's murder. He was taken to the police station for questioning when, out of the blue, during this interview, he confesses to the murder. But not just the murder of Kitty, but also of 2 other women, Annie Mae Johnson and 15-year-old Barbara Kralik. Johnson had been shot and burned to death in her apartment, while Kralik was found dead in the home of her parents. Mosley detailed the entire account of the attacks, corroborating the evidence found at the scene. When asked about a motive, he said he just wanted to kill women because, quote, they were easier and didn't fight back. Which, disturbingly enough, this demonic entity had a wife and 2 sons. His wife was an RN working the overnight shift, so while his ass should have been home keeping watch over his family, he was out in the streets at 2 a.m. attacking complete strangers. Dick move, right? The trial started on June 8, 1964. His initial plea was not guilty, but after a psychiatric evaluation suggested that Mosley was a necrophile, the plea was changed to not guilty by reason of insanity. He went over the events of Kitty's murder, gave details behind the murders of the other 2 women, then he proceeded to cop to R-ing 8 other women committing 30 to 40 burglaries. The trial on June 11, 1964, after 7 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty for the murder of Genovese. He was not convicted of the other 2 women's murders, mainly because there was not enough evidence, and another man had already confessed to Barbara Kralik's murder, which Mosley would end up appearing in court to testify during that man's trial as well. Mosley was sentenced to death on June 15, 1964 by presiding judge J. Irwin Shapiro, who stated, "I don't believe in capital punishment, but when I see a monster like this, I wouldn't hesitate to pull the switch myself." When the sentence was read, Mosley showed no emotion while spectators in the courtroom cheered, and I probably would too. Unfortunately, the sentencing did not stick. Mosley tried to have the conviction appealed, arguing that his lawyer had not provided him with the best defense because he was also the lawyer who helped Kitty during her bookmaking trial. So he was trying to say that there was some sort of conflict of interest, but he didn't end up taking that up with the court until many years later, so that really didn't help his appeal. But on June 1st, 1967, the NY Court of Appeals found that Mosley should have been allowed to argue lack of culpability due to being medically insane. So his sentence was commuted to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. He did escape for a short time on March 18th, 1968. He overpowered a guard on his way back from the Meyer Memorial Hospital in Buffalo, New York. He had gone to the hospital for a minor surgery to correct a self-inflicted injury. He escaped into the temporarily vacated home of the Kaluga family. When the couple came home 3 days later, he held them hostage, arred Mrs. Kaluga, and fled again in the couple's car. He traveled to Grand Island and broke into another house, holding another lady and her daughter hostage for 2 hours before releasing them unharmed. Shortly after, he surrendered to the police, and he was given 2 additional 15-year sentences for the hostage incidents. He applied for parole for the first time in 1984, trying to play himself up as a victim because of the infamy he faced on the outside. He basically tried to call what he did to Genovese a mugging gone wrong. Thankfully, he was denied parole, and he would be denied the 17 subsequent requests for parole as well. Eventually dying in prison on March 28, 2016 at the age of 81, having spent 52 years behind bars, making him at the time the second longest standing inmate in New York. 2 weeks following the murder, the New York Times paper posted an article stating that 38 people had heard the attack going on and no one called the police. The incident gave birth to a psychological theory called the bystander effect. According to Psychology Today, the bystander effect occurs when the presence of others discourages an individual from intervening in an emergency situation. Basically, people chose not to get involved because they believed someone else would help, but the reporting on the case was sensationalized. No one knows exactly how many people witnessed the murder. Now let's talk about the phenomenon surrounding Genovese's case. So no one even knows exactly how many people witnessed the murder, and some people just didn't want to get involved at all for their own safety in some cases. So after some more investigation, we find out that it was much less than 38 people who had witnessed the attack. An exact number was never given, but the estimate that comes up a lot is a dozen or so people. In actuality, a few people did contact the police. Now, this was a time when trust for the police was shoddy at best, which may have contributed to the lack of calls. Some people did not call because they thought it was possibly a domestic quarrel or a drunken brawl. There was also no 911 like we have today. If you wanted to contact the police, you had to find the number to your local precinct or reach out to the operator to have the call connected. The layout of the apartment complex made it so that someone who witnessed the first attack may not have seen the second, and vice versa. While the bystander effect was coined by this incident, the New York Times story that followed the murder was severely flawed. 4 years following the murder, Kitty's case was referenced as one of the driving forces that led to the creation of the 911 emergency number. In 1968, AT&T, which owned the majority of telephone lines at the time, established the 911 line. They chose that number because it was unique and easy to remember. So that's the case of Kitty Genovese, how her demise helped fuel the need for a centralized emergency service number, and the bystander effect. Please let me know in the comments below if you learned anything new from the video, or if you have any facts you want to add to the conversation. I hope you all stay safe and cool in this abominable heat, and don't forget your water, your sunscreen, and your self-care. If there are any remaining family members who remember Kitty Genovese, I just wish you all the best, because I understand that mourning never really stops. Also, quick note, I know this video is late. It's been written for like a couple weeks now. However, I have been moving. We just bought a house, so I'm really excited about that. I now have an office, so you will be seeing this space more often if that's something that you're interested in. But yeah, that's all I wanted to say. Love you. Bye.